you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, "To an unknown God." What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed life is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
And continuing from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, the first two verses I read last week as well, so they may sound familiar. Then God spoke all these words, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it." Several years ago, the American Film Institute conducted a survey to determine the top 50 movie heroes and the top 50 movie villains of all time. And no, Moses didn't win. He and his alter ego, Charlton Heston, appeared in the number 43 spot on the list for their work in Cecil B. DeMille's epic 1956 film, The Ten Commandments. Moses always had a little trouble catching a break. The top-ranking hero in the survey, though, was the character of Atticus Finch in the book and the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. The brilliant Gregory Peck won the Academy Award for Best Actor for that role in 1963. And if you've ever read the book or seen the movie, you will know why Atticus Finch got the nod for the hero and why Peck received the Oscar for his quietly powerful performance. Atticus Finch is an attorney in small town Alabama who agrees to defend Tom Robinson, a black man accused of raping a white woman. falsely accused. So despite the flack that Atticus and his children endure because of his commitment to justice and truth, he is steady, consistent, unflappable, and ever compassionate throughout the story, even when his client is wrongly condemned. The racists in town, and there are plenty of them, oppose him, but the entire Black community recognizes him as a deeply moral man and the sole voice of conscience when so many others are silent. In the scene after the guilty verdict is handed down by the all-white jury, when the trial is over and everyone has exited the main floor of the classroom or the courtroom, the people in the balcony remain. And in the segregated South, the balcony was where the Black folks sat. The only white person in the balcony at this moment is Scout Finch, Atticus's daughter. And as Atticus packs his briefcase on the defense table below, a man nudges Scout and says, "Stand up." And when she asks why, he says, "Your father's passing by." And as Atticus leaves the courtroom, every person in the balcony stands out of respect for him. Gets me every time. We don't often see or even feel moved by such reverence anymore. In this time of deep division in our culture, we can't even agree on who or what is worthy of reverence. But clearly, little is collectively deemed as sacred. Sarcasm, cynicism, vulgarity, and disrespect are the rule of the day. And the right to free speech that we all hold so dear has become weaponized, so that anybody can say anything, no matter how coarse or crude, no matter if it's factual or truthful, no matter if it is unhelpful, and even if it is harmful to our public discourse and community life. The 10 Commandments begin not with a rule, but with a description of a relationship. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. God speaks directly to the people, laying claim upon them and establishing the foundation for all the expectations that follow. And it's a not so subtle hint to the Israelites that they have reason to revere their Lord, the one to whom they owe their freedom, their salvation, and their very lives. To these people who have been delivered from slavery, nourished and sustained in the wilderness, and given a hand-picked leader to show them the way, God offers a vision of life and social order that begins with a basic tutorial on what reverence looks like. God alone. No other gods before me, no idols, no misuse or disrespect of the Lord's name, and honor the Sabbath. The first one, you shall have no other gods before me, is not the official establishment of monotheism. That comes a lot later. In fact, this commandment actually acknowledges the existence of other gods. In ancient Israel and throughout the Near East, a whole host of deities was recognized and worshiped. But the Israelites are called here to worship Yahweh alone. There will be an exclusive relationship because Yahweh is jealous and unwilling to accommodate divided allegiances. Second commandment specifically prohibits the Israelites from creating images of God or any other god and worshiping those, for the same reason as the first commandment. That's not the kind of sharing that God encourages. And it takes the Israelites all of about 5 files. This one. The voice shifts with the presentation of the third commandment. No longer is God the speaker, but the one spoken about. And again, reverence is foundational to the command not to use the name of God carelessly. God's very name is sacred and not to be invoked frivolously or falsely. And then the fourth command, to remember the Sabbath and make it holy, calls the Israelites to revere God by modeling their pattern of working and resting on the same formulation that God demonstrates at creation. The task of making life is always supposed to be followed by a period of refraining from work and engaging in some religious ritual. This rule then segues from the God-focused commandments to the neighbor-focused commandments that we'll talk about over the next couple of weeks. Knowing the story of God's ongoing covenant with the Israelites provides us with an understanding of why and how God delivers them from slavery to freedom, which enables us to see how and why the commandments are necessary for their relationship and for the growth, health, and strength of their community. One of the consequences for the Israelites of the commandments is that the practices or disciplines imposed by the law makes them distinctly different from all the neighboring tribes. But what about us? We aren't that particular group of people in that particular place. If the law was given to them, why do we have to observe the commandments? And what does our defiance of them look like? Well, from none other than Jesus himself, we learn that the primary goal and purpose of our lives is to be focused on God, to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. Sounds a lot like reverence to me. To acknowledge that God is separate from and different from us, and to put God first above all else. To do that, however, means that our main focus is not on a whole bunch of other priorities, including but not limited to self, power, money, fame, time, family, nation, pleasure, religion, security, comfort, the need to be right. Can you think of any others? We do it all the time, right? We are so easily distracted and inclined toward instant gratification, which quickly leads us to relegating God to the bottom of the list, even those of us who are in church every Sunday. The church, too, has violated that one regularly, making idols of buildings and doctrine and money and long-held resentments. It's what we do. Idols and graven images sound so old-fashioned, so not 21st century-ish. But let's consider for just a moment some of the ways we misrepresent the holy. We hang pictures of Jesus in our churches whose resemblance to us is uncanny. And while that seems relatively innocent, I wonder about the subtle messages to and about folks who come into our churches and we see on the street and who appear on our television screens who don't look like us. Are they still created in the image of God? Do we treat them like they are? And we prefer tame, baby-like angels and cherubim on our Christmas cards over the mysterious and scary ones in the scriptures. We picture God as a bearded, grandpa-like guy sitting on a Santa chair in heaven, waiting to give us what we ask for. But the second commandment emphasizes the fact that God cannot be contained or controlled by us. And that's not always how we treat God. Related to the first and the second commandment is the third, about how we talk about the divine. It prohibits the use and abuse of the name of God, and it doesn't just happen when we swear. It warns against making false oaths in God's name. It calls out the practice of using God's name to justify bad behavior or attribute hateful motives to God that come instead from the speaker's heart and mouth. Listen to some of the TV preachers and acclaimed religious leaders in the public eye today who will say with authority that God inflicts disease on those people and natural disasters on others because of how they vote or who they love or any other number of reasons. To proclaim that death and destruction and suffering are God's will and work is contrary to everything Jesus tells us about God. And finally, the command to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Instead of a prohibition like the first three, it's kind of a call to action, right? To treat this day differently from other days when we produce and perform. It's a call to stop, to rest, to be. And we are supposed to do it because God does it. But it's not just a self-serving invitation to be a couch potato on Sunday afternoon. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male, your female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. It is a mandate to those in power, and in this case, it was actually only Israelite males who were the owners of people and property, to give their human and animal possessions an opportunity to rest and be restored to. We are so bad at this, and we've only gotten through 4 commandments so far. Not only do we not give ourselves the opportunity for rest, we expect that nobody else will either, right? We can't fulfill our wants and needs if everybody else stops and rests, so we expect everybody else to keep moving too. Fundamentally, the 10 Commandments are not about rules. They are about relationship. Like the Israelites, God calls us into freedom, although we all have our preferred slaveries that we slide back into. Because of that, God gives us an owner's manual, an instruction book, a structure, a template, if you will, for learning reverence. Because that's where it all starts. We learn to revere our God, and then maybe we will come to revere our neighbors. That can be our hope, anyway. Thanks be to God. Amen.